Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second National Asian Heritage Month Symposium. My name is Farah Fancy, and we are here presenting today for you a number of talks. So welcome to this conversation. And as people get in, I'll just once again remind you that many of us are settlers, immigrants, descendants of those forcefully brought to the land where we are now. And so if you are Indigenous or perhaps Indigenous like myself, but not necessarily Indigenous to this particular territory where you are right now, regardless of where you are and who you are, we pay respect and we recognize the original custodians of the land where we are. And out of respect for the rights of Indigenous people, it's our collective responsibility to critically interrogate the colonial histories and present day implications of this. And so the work that we do on behalf of the Festival Asiatique is from the perspective of honoring, protecting, and sustaining this land and its people who are first on its territory. So we strive to go beyond acknowledging and the land itself, and we weave in Indigenous knowledge. And that's why we've had these First Nations elders coming in and watching and also giving their reflections at various points during the day. And we share those principles, and we invite you to go beyond acknowledgement and into the doing. And so for today, this is the reason why we've got you on board with us and present with us today. So if you choose to do so, you can share your video with us. If you prefer to stay in the background, you're more than welcome to, but we would like you to use the chat if possible when we're doing this presentation. I'm going to pass it over to you, Himmat.
Okay, so my name is Himmat. I am one of the members of the board of the Montreal Festival Asiatique, and I'm really happy to be here. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about, how to deal with difficult emotions or feelings and things like that. I'm also, in addition to being on the board of Festival Asiatique, I'm also on the board of an organization called Montreal Arts Intercultural, which is a presenter of diverse artists from Montreal's diverse cultural and other communities. I'm presently working on a performance that's going to be presented in the 2022 edition of Festival Asiatique, and it's a multidisciplinary piece. I'm originally a composer, a musician, but over the last couple of years, I'm branching out into a whole bunch of other stuff. So, Farah.
Thank you very much for that, Himmat. So a lot of you know already that I'm the project manager of the symposium, but for those of you who don't know, I have a life outside of the symposium, and actually I don't normally work for the Festival Asiatique. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you some questions. So is everybody comfortable with the chat? Mm-hmm. Yes, you were comfortable with the chat? So you can, I'm going to ask you a question. In the chat, I'd like you to tell me everything you think you know about me. So I'm giving you agency to make assumptions about me. Tell me everything that you think you know about me. And at the same time, I'm going to offer for you a screen share while we do that, just so that you can be watching something else other than watching me for a change. So I'd like for you to tell me everything that you think you know about me. For example, what do you think that I am like on a regular basis? Do you think that I have a family? Yes or no? What are the assumptions that you believe to be about me? Where do you think I grew up? Where am I born? Where am I going in life? And what I'm showing you here is some of the artists that I work with. So I've already given you a hint there. So in the organization that I work with, it's called Le Groupe Herencias. And what we try to do is we try to bring those folks who are underrepresented into the fold. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in a moment. But what I do is what I am going to explain to you now. And so one of the titles that I have is Shift Disturber. So what I do is the Shift Disturber, that's the what. It's to create fearless, flossom leaders that foster cultures of respect, justice, and empathy. So these are the people that I work with. You can see some of the performance artists that I work with to start to engage with people individually. How I do that is through cultural stripping. So what we try to do is we try to dismantle normative behavior and ingrained assumptions that people have in order to decolonize what we have. So we are engaging in a process together that of course takes time, space, energy, and also momentum as well as resiliency. So the result and the goal of that is so that I also become a fire starter, so that you as individuals, organizations, collectives, and companies can align yours or their purpose with Indigenous knowledge sharing, so that really you can live in harmony with the world around you in a 360-degree manner. So that we're not only talking about what you do professionally, but what you do also as a human being, your intersectional being. So that's that framework of understanding how aspects of our social and political identity might combine to create unique modes of discrimination. For example, with respect to race, class, gender, even discipline. So you can see there's a lot of gender work that's happening here in this video. So when we talk about that, we talk about how we are intersectional people. So the goal is not to be thinking only of the most underrepresented or the most marginalized part of ourselves. The goal is to think about how we are a whole, everything that we are, everything that we are part of, how we all combine together. And so what I would explain to you, or what I would offer, is that another thing that I do is that I'm an artist doula. Because what I believe is that all artists have the capacity to create. And when we create, this creation is almost like a birth of our creative identity. And once we experience this creative identity, that's our authentic self. But the issue is that sometimes with trauma, with violence, with adversity, whether it be social or political or institutional or systemic or historical, these transitions can sometimes be challenging. So those of us who are willing and able to do so on our own, they can engage with creativity and transformation, and they can do it alone. But some people who have gone through this violence, trauma, and adversity, sometimes they can benefit from being accompanied through the process. And so I would contend that just like a doula helps parents go through the process of childbirth, not only for the birthing of the child, but to prepare to bring the child into their lives and into their regular lives, this is what a doula does. So in the same way, I call myself an artist doula, to help that process for artists so that they can integrate this creative identity into their lives, despite the fact that they have gone through trauma, through violence and adversity. So now the thing is that we see, especially in our communities and our cultures, being Asian creative people, whether we work in the arts, we are cultural workers, or we work in organizations, that we are over capacity and that we are underfunded, we're also under supported. So we need to work together to find new ways to create support systems for ourselves. And so what I ended up doing is I ended up taking funds that I receive sort of more from the corporate world or from the organizational world, the institutional world, as I do as a coach or a consultant. And I fed that money into creating these performance pieces that you're seeing here today. So this performance, for example, is a piece called Yamayo, and it's about the discovery or the uncovering of how one can integrate the ideas of Yamaya, who is the mother, all these ideas of sensitivity, sensuality, of discipline, about the workhorse who just gets everything done like a warrior. How can that role be put into a male body? And so it was discussion and a discourse between the different dancers that you see here on the screen. So I'm going to give a stop to the screen share right here, just so that you can come back to me. So I wanted to see in the chat, I see that there's a couple people who've made some assumptions here. So mother of two, Pakistani heritage, artist and artist doula, thriving on challenges, socially conscious and engaged, doesn't like durian. Absolutely. And my parents are from Pakistan. You're from Saskatchewan, you have a child, you're married, you seem to be very kind and understanding. Okay, so these are some of the things that I've revealed in the course of the symposium. But what are other things that you think about me? What are other things that I mentioned before? What religion do you think I am? Where do you think that my politics lie? What kind of clothes do you think I like? What kind of music do you think I like? Let's just do that. What kind of music do you think I listen to? People are thinking. Aha. So this is the challenge, is that sometimes we get confronted with these situations where we have to make an assumption. And when we're conscious of these assumptions, sometimes we don't put them down, we don't engage with answering. But at the same time, on a normal and a daily basis, we have to make these assumptions on whether we're going to ask this person on a street corner for directions or this other person on the street corner for directions. Who would be more credible? We make these assumptions and decisions all the time. And those assumptions and decisions are made only through experience, and those are through the experiences that we've been allowed to have. So the thing is that, again, when we talk about trauma, violence, and adversity, in certain cases, we haven't been allowed to experience some of these things. And so they just sit in our bodies and they get passed from generation to generation to generation to a point where there's blockages, where we no longer feel connected to our identity and connected to our true selves, or that authentic self that I was talking to you about. So just before I go on, I just want to check in the middle of this. I know that normally we have the questions at the end. Does anybody have a question specifically about what I was talking about just now? Feel free to raise your hand, or you can drop something in the chat if you have any questions. And feel free to do that throughout this presentation if you've got anything that you'd like to ask about that. So this idea of the artist doula, the reason why I'm doing this again is to support artists through the process. So we just heard a talk with Rosina and she was talking about that support. We've been talking about support actually throughout the day. So this is not something that I can check off on the box from Canada Art Council. There's no definition for artist doula. So I'm creating a new role for myself. And so what I do is I create a position for myself where I use the arts, therapeutic techniques, because I am well-versed in a number of different psychology, social work, also creative arts therapies. I started the Dance Movement Therapy Association in Canada, as well as a lot of Indigenous practices. And I've spent a lot of time with elders around the world. And so I try to bring this knowledge, filter through my own body and through my own heritage and through my own identity, so that I avoid being a culturally appropriative and rather try to nourish it through my own experience. So I just like to quickly share a story with you. I was in Costa Rica with the Bribri tribe, and I was noticing that the kids always there, they were always asking the elders for certain things, and sometimes they wouldn't say please and thank you, and the elder would reprimand them, right? Is that normal in our culture, that if you don't say please and thank you, that you say that's disrespectful? Would you agree? Yeah. I see some head nods there, yes. But at the same time, every time the children asked for water, they didn't get asked, how come you didn't say please and thank you? So myself, rightly so, there was an assumption made, because I think it was known fact that I have 2 kids. I'm interested in discipline. So I asked, why is that you didn't ask them to say please and thank you during that time, every time they asked for water? And the Bribri elder told me that there's 3 things that we do not have to say please and thank you because they're a given right. And so I said, okay, tell me what these 3 things are. He said, okay, first is water. So that I understood. Everybody get that? The water is a basic human need and a given right? Makes sense, right? The second thing he told me is fire. Fire. So fire, would you agree with me that that is a given right, that we are entitled to fire? Especially up here in the northern part of Turtle Island, it does get kind of cold, and so fire is kind of useful, especially for cooking. They use it more for cooking down in the south, because as I said, I was in Costa Rica. And then the third thing that he told me was chilies. So can somebody tell me in the chat, why would he say chilies are a basic human right? Does anyone have an idea? I'm seeing some no's.
Because they're localized. My name is Millie, and I would say because they're localized to that specific place and space and land, and it's a part of their connective medicine.
Yes, that's part of the answer. But part of what he also told me, thank you very much for that response, is that on every household in the Bribri community, they have a caja, like a little container of chilies. And so I said, wait a second, every time I've eaten at your house, you've warned me that you don't make spicy food. So why is it again that you need chilies? And he said, it's a reminder for every time we eat that we have to have our own sabor. Does anybody know what sabor means? Our own flavor. Yes, our own flavor. So that flavor can be different depending on your mom's cooking or your auntie's cooking or your own cooking. That flavor changes with the quantity of chili that you put in. That is your own individuality. And so he was saying that we have a basic right to our own individuality, our own authenticity. But again, sometimes when we face trauma, adversity, and violence, we cut off that right because we just don't know how to engage with it, because it's too complicated to deal with on our own. And so again, this is the reason why I act as an artist doula. And so one of the projects that I'm working on right now is actually with Himmat. So I am Himmat's artist doula to help guide him through the process or accompany him through the process of his production that he mentioned is going to be presented in 2022. So Himmat, did you want to tell a little bit more about that project that we're working on?
Sure. So basically the project is like something that a lot of artists, you know, sometimes we're called on to confront and process really difficult emotions or, you know, experiences or stories that have really challenged us or been demanding, because we're all driven by a desire to share these stories using our art. And so one example is, as Farah mentioned and I said at the beginning, is the performance that I'm sort of in creation and development for now, which is called PANJ, which is the Punjabi word for 5. So the driver for the piece was that kind of experience. It was a sudden and premature loss of my father. He died in 2006 after being diagnosed with Streptococcus G, which some of you probably know as the flesh-eating disease. So shortly after the diagnosis, he went into a coma, and he was in a coma for about 2 weeks before he finally passed away. I imagine many of you have probably suffered the loss of a parent or someone who's close to you, or you might have gone through something difficult or particularly intense or challenging. If you have, maybe you want to indicate in using the symbols so that we can have a sense of, you know, how all of us have gone through things that are difficult for us. So if you've experienced something like that, indicate it using the feedback symbols.
Actually, Himmat, in this room, we don't have the feedback symbols, but people can indicate in the chat with a yes.
Okay, in the chat. So yeah, I mean, we often carry the marks that those experiences leave for many years, and sometimes it's for the rest of our lives. So for me, losing my father was quite traumatic. In addition to the loss of a parent, I also felt that I was losing connections to my history, my culture, my identity. And so for almost 15 years after his death, I pretty much kind of just threw myself into my work, and I took on more and more work, longer and longer hours, trying to just numb the pain in my body and like bury the feelings and not really address them. So I ended up retiring from my job with the public service in 2017. And at that point, I decided I needed to do something to address the suffering that I was going through and try and find a way to heal myself. So the process that I engaged in was a holistic one that has 3 elements to it. So the first one was therapy, and it was specifically this kind of therapy that's known as EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The second one was to renew and deepen my meditation practice, which I had neglected for a few years. And then the third one was to, now that I was retired, to kind of re-engage in an artistic process. And I had this vague idea that I could somehow use that to support the processing of the trauma that I'd experienced, and then to bring myself to a place where I was understanding and I could start to see insights into what I had gone through. So the process that I engaged in globally was quite different from what we understand by, you know, typical sort of usual artistic processes. that are proposed by our dominant sort of post-colonial arts establishment here in Canada. And a lot of that is based on constructs of, you know, the dominant Canadian culture. And you can trace it back to colonialist sort of oppression, rejection, and even disparagement of the cultures of the territories that were stolen and exploited by colonizers. So what's worked for me is to kind of try and move beyond those post-colonial distinctions, like this is this and that's that and that's the other, and those sort of conceptual borders that have been constructed between therapy, self-care, and art. And I wanted to move towards something that's more integrative, that reintegrates all of these elements into a much more holistic approach, that also reflects to a large extent my own Asian heritage, in which art is very much a part of daily life. It's not like a separate thing that you engage in a studio somewhere. It's very much a part of your life. So I'll talk a little bit about those three elements. So the first one was therapy. I worked with a life coach a few years ago, and he had recommended that I seek EMDR therapy. So again, that's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And that is a therapy that's based on the understanding that when you go through a trauma or a really difficult experience, what happens is that the two hemispheres of your brain disconnect because the experience is too intense and you're not able to process it. So the technique of EMDR seeks to reconnect the hemispheres of your brain. And it can be done through touch, touching alternate sides of your body, through hearing by sending sounds to each of your ears, or alternatively, or through movement of your eyes from left to right. And once you go through that, then you start to be able to process the traumatic experience. So initially what happens is cognitive techniques are used so that you kind of revise those experiences that have traumatized you, and you rewrite those narratives. And then you apply the EMDR technique over the top of it. In my case, it was using headphones with clicks alternatively in my left and my right ears. So my takeaway out of that therapy process was a lot of stories about my father. And those stories sort of helped me rebuild my relationship with him. And then also, it was quite curious, but resuscitate links to my family history, my culture, and my identity. And a lot of those stories had really rich experiential and emotional elements. So those I've kind of taken, and they fed into my artistic process for PANJ, the performance that I'm working on right now. So the second technique that I want to talk about is meditation and mindfulness. So in parallel to the therapy, what I did is renew and deepen my sort of on again, off again meditation practice. And what I wanted to do was try and reconnect with my body. So I was just coming out of a corporate professional career as a policy expert and a senior director with the federal government. So pretty much all of that is work that you do in your head. You know, it's research, analysis, writing, like briefing notes, papers, and things like that. And then what I realized is over the years I've been doing that work, I'd completely disconnected from my body. And as I deepened my meditation practice, what happened is I started to understand that it was my body that had become the repository, or even a hiding place, if I could call it that, for all the trauma and the difficult emotions that I had gone through. And then through my meditation, when I was able to bring myself to stillness, that allowed me to start retrieving and processing and understanding what was happening in my body. And the technique that was particularly effective for me was body scans. Some of you may be familiar with that. What it is you focus on your breathing like you normally do in a lot of meditation practices. Once you're still, then you focus your attention on different parts of your body. You can start with your toes and work up to the top of your head, or the reverse. And once you've done the scan and you've identified those locations in your body where you're feeling something, whether it's a feeling, a sensation, or an emotion, then you go back to those places and you sit with those places. And then over time, what happens is your understanding and your insight about what's going on in your body starts to emerge. So in my case, the body scans helped me distinguish, I didn't realize, but I had two types of trauma. One was from the loss of my father, and then the other one came from unprocessed experiences of being bullied in the workplace. So that was like really a surprise. What I started to do then was write down some of the insights that were starting to emerge through my meditation. And then that writing also became part of my artistic process, because some of the texts that came out of the meditation were eventually integrated directly into my creative process. So I'll talk about that now, my artistic process. So in the absence of my father, what I started to do is spend a lot more time with my mother. And then I turned to her to kind of help me retrieve memories of my father and then rebuild the story of my relationship with him. We started to meet weekly, and we'd go just near here, walking on the banks of the river, the St. Lawrence. And what we started to do is share stories. I'd say, tell me about, you know, what he was like in this instance or that instance, what it was like living here or there. And so what we created was a dialogue between the two of us. And we started to share stories between both of us about our family's history and our journey from India to England, where I grew up, and then here to Canada. So it was those conversations that triggered a desire to integrate my artistic practice into my healing process. And what I thought is that out of those stories and that information that we were generating, I could generate a performance in order to share some of those stories publicly. So initially it was just mechanically writing them down. But as time went by, something else started to emerge. And that was that there was a link between the stories that were coming from my dialogues with my mother, and then what was emerging from my therapy, and then from my meditation practice. So I started to see like threads that were interconnecting those three things. So it was kind of like an aha moment. And I realized that what I was doing, what I needed to do was integrate those three things and have one sort of holistic practice that would help me to move forward. And then my writing and my music, so along the way, they started to become a way to augment the therapy and the meditation and help me process the experiences that I went through. And so as the title of the workshop that we gave, it kind of helped me revise, reinvent, and then reconnect to those experiences more authentically in a way that supports my healing. And I've also found, you know, as a side effect that, you know, through the meditation and the therapy, the quality of writing of my music and my, you know, creative writing, it's become a little bit deeper and a little bit more nuanced, and I can express things that are a lot more complex through my writing and music than I could before. So that was kind of really exciting for me to experience that. And then what I'm hoping to do is share the insights I have, then find resonances with people who I present the work I'm doing to, and then perhaps even help people with the difficult experiences that they're going through. I wanted to give an example just to end my presentation. So through my meditation, to sort of make it a little bit more concrete for you, I'd identified areas of really intense pressure around my heart center. And I didn't really know what they were when I first started doing it. So as I continued to explore through meditation, what I realized that the pressure that I was having here was coming from two directions. There was a downward pressure and there was an upward pressure as well. And so later, as I continued to meditate on that, what I was able to distinguish between the two is that the one coming downwards was really hard, and it was a manifestation of the trauma and depression that was related to having been bullied in the workplace. In contrast, what was coming up from below was much more gentle, and that was something that I hadn't noticed right away. So it was like a wave of water just coming around my feet and then enveloping me, moving upwards. And it would just stop, and then it would be like a gentle sort of pressure upwards here. And then what I did is I connected that to my therapy, and my therapist had counseled me that the stress, the PTSD that I'd gone through related to the bullying was something that I could let go of, because I was never going to go back to that workplace again or that environment. So I didn't need to carry that experience anymore. And then also what my work with a therapist allowed me to do was accept the loss of my father and his death. So when the sadness comes, I just let it come now. I don't resist it. I don't fight it. I can sit with those feelings. And it's quite paradoxical in a way, but doing that also deepens my connection to my father. And in that sadness, out of that sadness, what I'm able to do is keep his memory alive. And that insight, it's really driven the creation and development process for PANJ as I articulate some of those ideas that are manifesting along the way. So the profound insight that I came to through that is that water is something that I feel very explicitly now, but it's a presence that's always been there in my life. And this feeling of a wave coming to envelop me, there's a link between the whole experience of stillness and that. Stillness is very much like looking at water. So, and the water is kind of like a mirror. It kind of reflects things to you. So that was like a really profound sort of awakening that unlocked all kinds of doors for me. And I've been able to move forward with the piece that way. So what I'll do, I can go into the chat, is to just drop in there. Whoops. The text is probably, there's too much text. But I was going to drop the abstract for the piece in. What I'll try and do is break it down. Then as we continue, I'll just drop pieces of it into the chat. Yeah, so that's it.
Actually, Himmat, I just wanted to also offer that we're creating a resource bank. So certain presenters, they're offering their resources so we can plunk them all into there with the abstract so that you can, those who are interested in learning about that show or others, they can please get a hold of us and you can learn a little bit more about each of us. But I wanted to just make mention that you can see from the way that Himmat speaks, he's very articulate, he's very sure of himself, and also he's articulated different mechanisms that he uses to look after himself. But yet at the same time, and he's already given me agency to speak about this because sometimes it's difficult to say it on your own. At the same time, he still has a difficult time processing all of these stories because it is really difficult. It's traumatic. So even a person like Himmat that on the outward side seems so strong and so sure and so resilient still has these fragilities that have come from years and years, generations, as well as centuries of trauma that's sort of embedded in his DNA. And so that's the work that I do with him, is to help him through that. Because Himmat, I know that you've already told me that I can disclose this, but there are days when you're very depressed and you just call me because you just need somebody there. So with that, it's just to make mention that especially for BIPOC folks, this is a real challenge. And so it's something that typically the arts councils don't fund. Again, that's, I'm saying typically. It's also something typically that when producers or diffusers contact us and say, okay, you're gonna get a certain amount of cachet, they don't necessarily include the cost of the support and care that's necessary to reveal some of these stories. Because sometimes people are like, yes, yes, show us this story for us so that we can share the stories of marginalized and underrepresented people. And so they're almost forcing us to choose the most challenging, the most difficult, the most vulnerable part of ourselves, and just sort of allowing us to go out on the stage, plunk it out for the enjoyment and almost like the spectacle version of the performance aspect. So we can say, yes, we heard this horrible or terrible or difficult or traumatic story, but then it leaves the artist sort of hanging, the artist really separate, the artist feeling isolated, perhaps feeling ashamed, even moments of during the process of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. And sometimes that embeds that sense of failure or sense of imposter, even though it's well received by the audiences, into the artists themselves, to the point where they drop out of the arts completely, or they find it too difficult and end up needing trauma or therapy in a different way, shape, or form. So that's why a person like me is there to accompany the process all the way through, to make sure that the person is looked after during the process. So it's not really dramaturgy, it's part of that. Like, we do a lot of dramaturgical work together. It's partly production management, it's partly production director, it's partly stage management, it's partly artistic direction. So my role is, again, intersectional, just like how I was talking about in the beginning, how that identity that people assume that we have is not necessarily full and complete. It's only what we have on the outside. So it's the same way my practice in the arts help people like Himmat so that he can do the performance, so that you all can see your own story in what's being represented, and hopefully then have a larger support network, because this is what we need to do, is create these larger support networks of caring for each other so that we can continue to deal and process and transform our particular stories and get rid of some of the trauma and reinvent ourselves. So Himmat, I know that you wanted to share something with the group that we can perhaps try all together, because I know that there is a lot of trauma in this room, in this space, and I don't want to leave you on the note of sort of bubbling up all of the traumas and these ideas that you might have in yourself, and then we just let you go off into the world to the other presentation. So Himmat, I'll let you take that back.
Okay, so what we're going to do is, it's a really short 3-minute body scan. So it gives you a little bit of a sense of what it is. And it's from, we can share the link with you later on in the resources that you're talking about. So what it is it's just a short 3 minutes, and it gives you a sense of what the body scan is. It's a body scan that was produced by UCLA. So I'll play that here, and you can hear it now. Just hold on a second. And to do it, you could just sit comfortably, and you could put your hands in your lap, and just, you can close your eyes, or you can unfocus and just look immediately in front of you towards the floor, and just kind of zone out and listen to the voice.
Millions of readers and listeners find peace, build focus, tame anxiety, and build a future based on kindness and compassion. Join us at mindful.org/newsletter.
Begin by bringing your attention into your body. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable to you. You can notice your body seated, wherever you're seated, feeling the weight of your body on the chair, on the floor. Then take a few deep breaths. And as you take a deep breath, bring in more oxygen, enlivening the body. And as you exhale, have a sense of relaxing more deeply. You can notice your feet on the floor. Notice the sensations of your feet touching the floor, the weight and pressure, vibration, heat. You notice your legs against the chair, pressure, pulsing, heaviness, lightness. Notice your back against the chair. Bring your attention into your stomach area. If your stomach is tense or tight, let it soften. Take a breath. Notice your hands. Are your hands tense or tight? See if you can allow them to soften. Notice your arms. Feel any sensations in your arms. Let your shoulders be soft. Notice your neck and throat. Let them be soft. Relax. Soften your jaw. Let your face and facial muscles be soft. Then notice your whole body present. Take one more breath. Be aware of your whole body as best you can. Take a breath. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes.
This practice brought to you by Mind.
Thank you very much for that, Himmat. And so our question to you, because as you know that I'm a body worker, so if you can tell by now, this is the reason why we bring this body work in. The question to you is that, did you notice any blockages when you went through that body scan? You can unmute yourself if you wish to. Did you notice any blockages? Were you relaxed? Now the thing is that this is layers upon layers upon layers. So that's great that you feel relaxed. Now, the thing is that I would like to invite you to do, because typically for people who are from the BIPOC folks, and we've got a lot of BIPOC folks in this room with us right now, you feel like there's a lot of things going on in your head. Yeah, I hear that. So one of the things that we notice for BIPOC folks, so what I'd like you to do right now, I'm going to invite you to move beyond that body scan and just to open your jaw. Just allow your jaw to relax. And as you allow your jaw to relax, if you can massage just in front of your ear, the joint where your jaw meets your head, and allow your mouth to fall open. And continue to massage and see if your mouth can fall a little further open. And I'll invite you to continue to do that while I explain that typically what we find is that a lot of BIPOC folks get headaches, and that is because there's a lot of silencing that goes on that we don't even realize that happens to us on a daily basis. And so this process of just relaxing our jaw to allow the sound to come out, to know that we are not silenced, is something just to help you so that you can process and get that sound to come out. So what I'd invite you to do right now is to continue to massage your jaw, relax your mouth open, and see if a sound comes out. And think about the quality of that sound. Is it soft? Is it loud? Is it deep? Is it high? What is the quality of that sound? Allow all of that sort of built up, whatever you have inside of yourself, to come out so that you can truly relax. So at this point, we just wanted to ask, does anybody have any questions for us? If you have any questions, you can please drop them in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and we would be happy to answer them for you. Just to let you know, Himmat and I work together with Arencias. So this case, we're putting together a show that he is the conceptor, but with Arencias, we've got a number of shows that are for underrepresented populations, and they're all BIPOC folks who've gone through some sort of violence, trauma, or adversity. So if any of you out there are producers or diffusers and want to know a little bit more about the work that we do, we'd be happy to share that with you. Or as you know, Himmat and I workshop and facilitate together. So if anybody wants us to come and do a workshop for their organization, their community center, their collective, or their institution, we'd also be willing to do that for you. We would be happy to come and create sort of a package for you so that everything we do is made to measure. So it really serves the needs of what you want, because we don't believe that there is that cookie cutter situation going on, because each individual has their own sabor. And so, like I was explaining before, so the way that we treat that with the workshops and talleres that we give also have a sabor that's different. So there's a question in the chat. If you can please share the link to the scan meditation. Is that possible, Himmat?
Yes.
And just to let you know, we're accumulating all of those resources that different panelists are providing for us, and we will share that all out, and that will be housed on the Festival Accès Asie website. There's a comment in the chat saying, thank you for saying this.
Also, there's another question about...
As to not make waves, silent.
There was also a question about what happens when thoughts come up when you're meditating. So I think the thing to understand is that when your thoughts come up as you're meditating, the thing to do is not engage with them. So it's okay if the thoughts come up, but just let them sit there. Let them like do their thing. And then, you know, so if you're meditating, or if you're doing a body scan and all of you go, oh crap, I've got a doctor's appointment at 3 in the afternoon tomorrow, and there might be a potential conflict. It's like, if that pops up, just kind of say, noted. And then when you end your meditation, because what it does is it kind of puts that off to the side so you can stay focused on what you're doing, because the thoughts will come up. You can't shut your mind down. Like, that's impossible. So as someone who's lived in their mind for the past 60 almost years, like, I find that very hard too. So thoughts do come up, and the thing to do is not ignore them, because that doesn't work. They just come back twice as strong. It's just let them play around in your head, but just don't focus on them. Bring yourself back to your body. And if you get lost, come back to your breathing. That's usually the anchor. So if you keep anchored on your breathing, then that's your home base that you come back to if you get lost.
So I have
Himmat,
a
I know that.
question.
Yeah, of course, Rosal.
Risa, yeah. So I choose not to show myself for this
That's
time.
okay.
But
That's fine. No
so
problem.
the process, all right. So the process is very embodied, and I do a lot of performance curation. I think a lot of what Farah was saying regarding the role that she's always taking on is very similar to how I imagine performance curation. Again, the process is very embodied, but in this time that we're actually dealing with forced isolation and we're talking to each other and not really seeing each other, how do you navigate this kind of communication really and connection? We're talking about connection all the time and care in relation to distance, and but again, how did it transform already with the new kind of setup that we had to deal with? And maybe just share some stories of how those are transforming at the moment, that we're physically distant, or we're just pausing and we're waiting to touch each other again. So how is it going? How is it going, this process?
Okay, so if you don't mind, Himmat, I'm going to take that question. So absolutely, things changed. It was a question of expectations, right? So Himmat and I had been working together for about a year. We'd worked in residencies together. We'd done presentations at different at festivals like Ginger Garden, and also out. We'd done residencies in Drummondville as well. And we had this process going, and we would meet on a regular basis. That was very embodied, and the work that was coming forward was very fluid and also very rich. And then also with COVID, then absolutely what happened was that we both had to isolate ourselves, both for very specific reasons, and we couldn't be in touch. And we still continue to maintain through the Zoom link. But as you know, you don't feel the same spirit through the Zoom links. And so what happened was that slowly things were okay, but then we came to a point where there was almost like a blow up. And we both didn't feel it coming, but it was just a consequence of COVID. And so there did hit this point where it's like, Himmat, I'm going to disclose it, that it's like, what's going on? I don't know what's happening. And it's almost like everything fell to pieces, to the point where he almost wanted to quit doing the work and forget about the entire show. So yes, it took us a little bit of time to renegotiate and re-navigate that, so that we could, again, look at the new set of expectations and then reboot in a way, and to pivot so the way that we could work. Luckily now we are able to meet very, very briefly in a very specific way. So that helps, but we continue to work by Zoom. We message each other, we write on chat. So we continue the support process, but we've just had to change the expectations. So Himmat, we have to unfortunately leave this talk. I wanted to thank everybody once again for coming. If you have any more questions, I've dropped my contact information in the chat, and I can pass you Himmat's information. I'm also in that ambassador list, as is Himmat. We'd be happy to get a hold of all of you or chat with all of you. And again, there are so many other presentations that are amazing. So we hope that you attend as many as you possibly can. Register for them so that you can see them later. And again, there's those First Nations reflections that happen on a daily basis. Always interesting to listen to, and always a lot of fun to hear all of the sharing. So thank you very much for coming. Himmat, thank you again for working with me again today. And we hope that you have a great night.
Bye-bye.